Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicola Hines. I'm the president for the League of Women Voters of Georgia, and welcome to the fourth installment of Good Trouble Tuesdays. This series started as a conversation between two league presidents in the Deep South, Georgia and Alabama, and asking a simple but urgent question. How do we get clear, factual information to residents about the policies and decisions that impact our communities, especially when those decisions don't stop at state lines? What began as a shared commitment to civic education has grown into a regional space for truth-telling, action, and connection. Tonight, we're expanding that circle. We are grateful to be joined by our sister leagues from Louisiana and Tennessee, alongside the League of Women Voters of Alabama, as we take on a topic that affects every one of us: data centers and Happy Earth Day. This conversation is about more than technology. It's about land use, water, energy, environmental justice, and the long-term impact on our communities. Thank you for showing up, leaning in, and staying in good trouble with us. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton to my sister from Louisiana.
Hello, everyone. Christy Green from Louisiana, and delighted to be here with our sister leagues to learn about data centers. We have had some concerns about this for a while in Louisiana, first in the northern part of our state, then to the south. In Louisiana, we care about clean water, affordable utilities, and industries that bring long-lasting, permanent jobs to our state. So we'll see what the conclusion is tonight about whether data centers do that. And I will pass it now to Debbie Gould in Tennessee.
Hi, I'm Debbie Gould. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Tennessee, and we too are very concerned about data centers. We're seeing this year with our state legislature that there's a lot of pushback about local governments actually being able to control where data centers are located. This is always important when local communities lose control of how they want to grow and what they want to do as they move forward. So with that, I'll pass it on to Kim Bailey.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Kim Bailey, the president of the League of Women Voters of Alabama, and I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Cindy Lowry, who is the executive director of the Alabama Rivers Alliance. And she is going to lead us through this conversation with some wonderful panelists. We hope that you'll ask questions and learn a lot of information this evening. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Cindy.
All right. Thank you so much, Kim and Christy and Debbie and Nicola. And I also have to add, since this is a wonderful League of Women Voter hosted event, that I am a proud member of the League of Women Voters of Alabama and Greater Birmingham. So wearing two hats, I guess, tonight on that front. And we're very excited to have this great panel from across multiple states to talk to you about this very important issue. And I can ask our panelists if you'll go ahead and come off or turn your cameras on, and I'm going to introduce you in just a moment. But we are, the way we're going to do this tonight is we've got some preset questions that we're going to talk to the panelists about and hear about what's going on in each of their states, and we're going to cover some of the basics, and then get a little deeper into what we're really seeing on the ground in all of these states, and then try to wrap it up with some solutions and some ways that we're hoping that we can solve and address these issues around data centers in our region and all the impacts that they're having on our environment and our communities. So that's what we're going to do, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys to ask questions, our audience to ask questions. There's a Q&A part of the webinar system here, so if you see that, please put your questions in there, and you can put those in anytime. And as the panelists are talking, if someone can answer your question while we're talking, that will happen. They can answer them live. If there's an opportunity to address those while we're talking, if it makes sense, we'll do that. But we'll also save some time at the end for questions from you guys as you're going. And I think you can put questions in the chat as well. So we'll try to manage both of those places for your questions and your participation. So with that, I'm excited to have our four panelists. We have Charles Miller, who is our policy director for the Alabama Rivers Alliance, which is the organization that I'm the director of. So I will try not to show any bias towards Charles. And but we at the Rivers Alliance have been thrust into the data center fights in Alabama. A year and a half ago, we had no. They were not on our radar, and now they're one of the main things that we're doing. So it's been a fast moving train. We also have Katie Miner, who is with the Alliance for Affordable Energy out of Louisiana. And I met Katie last year, seems like a long time ago, but last year at a conference in Miami with Southeast Climate and Energy Network that both of our organizations are involved in. And she really helped me to learn more about what's going on with data centers. And so I'm glad to have Katie here tonight. And then we have Andrea Jones with Georgia WAND. And I'm just meeting Andrea and getting to know her through this platform. So I look forward to hearing from Andrea. I know that Georgia, I feel like, has a little more advanced build out of data centers than maybe some of our other states. So I hope that we can hear what's going on in Georgia and learn from what's happening there. And then we have Yolanda Spinks, who's with the Southern Environmental Law Center, which works across all of our states. Well, maybe not. I don't know if y'all work in Louisiana, but across the region anyway, in multiple states. And they've been doing, they're a great partner of ours here in Alabama. And I know they've been very involved in what's going on in Tennessee with data centers there. And Yolanda works with communities and environmental justice and puts out a great newsletter about what's going on in the region with environmental justice. So I look forward to you guys getting to hear from Yolanda tonight as well. So with that introduction briefly from me, I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit more about what their organization is and does and how data center work kind of feeds into the work that they're doing in their different areas of the region. So we can start. Well, how about we start? I'll go backwards this time. We'll start with Yolanda.
Awesome. So my name is Yolanda Spinks. I am the environmental justice policy advocate with Southern Environmental Law Center. The work that we are doing across our states, we're not in Louisiana yet, Cindy. But we work throughout the Southeast, and the work that we're doing is fighting for clean air, water, and environment throughout the Southeast. That looks like representing communities, fighting like the data centers in Bessemer. It looks like fighting data centers in Memphis with XAI. The work that I get to do is to work directly with community. It kind of be a liaison between community and our attorneys. And sometimes that looks like, for instance, in Bessemer, helping them organize community meetings, putting together mailers, just helping communities who may not always have the resources available to do these things, and provide them with support, assistance, and sometimes guidance on how to be effective in what they're trying to do on a grassroots level.
All right, Andrea.
Hello, everyone. I am Andrea Young-Jones with Georgia WAND. I'm Government Relations and Public Policy Director. And Georgia WAND stands for Women's Actions for New Directions. Georgia WAND was founded in 1984. Our focus then was about nuclear proliferation in terms of Plant Vogtle out in Waynesboro, Georgia, which is a Georgia Power entity that does nuclear energy. Also the SRS, which is Savannah River site, which is a storage facility for nuclear waste. And so we started there in terms of working in that community where we were seeing issues in terms of health and what was happening to the families out there that worked in these plants, but then also were impacted by all of the radioactive materials that were there. And then we expanded. We saw that that this was a statewide issue in terms of how Georgia permits and how Georgia works in terms of permitting industry and waste and how it goes about regulating it. Georgia is a very lax regulating environmental regulation type of state. And so Georgia WAND, we work statewide to bridge the urban and rural divide. And one of the things we see with data centers is that it is in rural areas and in urban areas. So it kind of fits what we are trying to do in terms of finding a way to have a maybe symbiotic type of relationship with community and data centers, just like Plant Vogtle is there now. It's not going anywhere. We are trying to work with Georgia Power or find ways that we could do community benefits, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But that is basically what our work has been. So data centers fits right in that because that's something that we are trying to do here in the statewide in terms of reforming how the state operates, but then also looking at energy and energy affordability and how data centers are also contributing to the high cost that we are seeing in terms of paying for Plant Vogtle. So I'm looking forward to discussing that further. And I wanted to let Yolanda know that we work very hand with the Southern Poverty Law Center here in Georgia, with the Environmental Law Center in Georgia on data centers and with some other coalition building. So looking forward to being on this panel with you.
All right. Katie?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Miner. I am the Community Solutions Manager for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. For 40 years now, this year, we have been the state's only consumer advocate at the Public Service Commission and at the New Orleans City Council, who both regulates our utilities. Now, because we sit at as both a consumer advocate and a public health advocacy organization, our policy work kind of meets at the crossroads of both social justice, sustainable economic development, and environmental protection, which is why we are so keen and locked in on this data center issue that is booming across Louisiana right now. We have been seeing an influx of announcements that we have been following closely, and we have very serious concerns about not only the secrecy behind these deals, but just the sheer amount of energy usage that they will require.
All right. And Charles. Feels weird to let you talk about the Rivers Alliance instead of me, but I'm going to treat you like everybody else tonight. So go for it.
Yeah, I hope I do a good job. So my name is Charles Miller. I am the policy director at the Alabama Rivers Alliance, and we're a statewide network of groups that are dedicated to protecting and restoring Alabama's aquatic resources through building partnerships, education, and advocating for sound water policy and its enforcement. And one of our kind of central issues here in Alabama that is common between these states to varying degrees is that we don't have in Alabama any kind of water permitting withdrawal. So no one governs how much water a single entity can use. There's no way to allocate water between competing uses. And so when you are talking about something like a data center, which is a pretty prodigious consumer of water coming to town, that may in some cases threaten water supplies for other people in that same community. And so because we don't have a way to do that, it is pretty much whoever's got the biggest straw wins. And, in that context, data centers can be very problematic. And so we got involved with data centers primarily just because it touches on this issue that's so critical to all of our work and so central to all of our work. As we've learned about this over the past, I guess 15 months or so since we've been working on these, we've also kind of learned how it impacts public health, how they can impact water quality and all sorts of things. And quite frankly, I'll say one of the most fun things for me, I went to law school to avoid doing math, but has been learning about kind of the economics of what's going on here and, who's profiting and who's paying the price. And so we've really, maybe taken a bit more of a full spectrum, 10,000 foot view of this issue than some of the other issues, but we're also working very closely on the ground with communities. I was at a city council meeting yesterday. I'm going to be at 2 city council meetings in different cities in Alabama next week. So this has really been an interesting topic for us to work on, and we're hoping that it can build some progress towards some of our longer term goals.
Great. Okay. Thank you all. I know you're all doing really incredible in-depth work on data centers. I want us to back it out for just a minute and talk and give that overview of what a data center is and all these sort of categories of impacts that we're seeing of these things in our communities. So I'm going to put y'all on the spot for a second and raise your hand if you want to be the first one to go, because if you're the first one to go, you have to do the what is a data center part. And then you can get into your specific impact that we assign to you. So who wants to do the what is a data center part? Just that basic, or I can do that part if you want me to. I'll give my like very brief sort of big picture, very hopefully regular person explanation of a data center, which is these are big giant buildings, oftentimes in these hyperscale situations that we're all seeing in our communities. It's multiple big giant buildings, like we're talking Walmart size buildings, multiple on a site of land, and they house hundreds, if not thousands, of computers just stacked on top of each other. Imagine just a bunch of laptops stacked on top of each other, and they're processing very fast all the data that's coming in from the internet. But particularly with hyperscale, we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence, technology advances, which is requiring way faster processing and way more capacity to store information and process it. And so all of this gets very, very hot and has to be cooled. And so it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of water, it takes a lot of infrastructure, it takes a lot of land, it's noisy potentially, and it takes energy like all day long, all the time. So it's just a really weird new thing for us to think about. As we all use our smartphones, we all use technology, and these big companies like Google and Meta and OpenAI and Anthropic and whoever they all are basically installing all these things on our devices that we don't even know how to get out of, that are making us use AI accidentally. In some cases, sometimes you can still opt out. So it's this really sort of mix of a lot of impacts, and they're trying to build them out so fast that because everybody's racing to win the AI prize. So which company is going to get it first? And so it's sort of a, if you build it, they will come, and like we do with roads and things like that sometimes. And that's where this massive build out is coming from. And so there's speculation about whether it's even all going to be needed. So there's a lot of issues that just really collide here that have got us all so concerned. So with that explanation, I will, why don't we start? I think the one that's sort of been the highest in people's minds and in our news feeds and things like that is energy, the energy use and the energy bills going up and things like that. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie and let you talk about the energy side of these impacts.
Awesome, thanks. And just to kind of continue your thread, like when I describe hyperscalers, when we're talking to folks, I kind of describe them as the teenagers of tech, right? They require more food, more energy, more space. They make more noise. They're just loud and boisterous, right? And so when you hear of a term like cloud computing, right, when we're thinking about where all of our digital data is stored, you have to remember that these clouds have an address somewhere in some community, and they do not come alone because to accommodate all of that power, they require really, really, really large energy infrastructure investments to generate that power. And now, so, data centers aren't new. Here in Louisiana, we've had 17 for years, right? But they're these small little data centers that help with hospital systems, right? And typical cloud things, right? But we're talking about things that far outpace 1 megawatt of energy, right? I'm talking about things that use over the energy consumption of 80,000 homes in the US, right? We are talking about these behemoth facilities that literally use power, and the power doesn't go off. We're talking about 24 hours of uninterrupted power constantly going, no matter rain, sunshine, or hurricane coming, right? The power does not go off. And so here at the Alliance, we have many concerns that come along with infrastructure of that size, including the procedural process to approve things like that, including the damage that it could do to already unstable grids like the ones we have here. I'm not sure about your grids, but in Louisiana, we aren't exactly known for having the best electrical system, right? And so we're talking about literally unprecedented investment in power that is not meant for people, but instead meant to generate profits for the very rich and the very few people.
All right. Okay. So that's the energy part. Let's talk about since air quality is related to the energy needs. I'm going to turn it over to Yolanda. I think, and I assigned this one to you because I feel like that's kind of one of the issues we're seeing in Tennessee and the Memphis one for sure. And we know that that's a similar issue. So I'm going to let you kind of cover the air part, even though I know you can cover the community and environmental justice part too.
So we are dealing with a big issue as it relates to air pollution from the data centers. So just to give you a kind of background, I live in Memphis, specifically south of Memphis. And this is a community that has been overburdened by air pollution. Just to kind of paint a picture, we have a refinery that's in the community. Tennessee Valley Authority operated a coal plant here for about 50, 60 years. They converted it to a gas plant, and so that is operating across the street from XAI. So this is a community that has already for generations been overburdened by pollution. Not to mention that Tennessee Valley Authority is also trucking coal ash through these same communities that they're having to dig out because the toxins are seeping through the lining that they had where they're buried. So now they're having to dig it up and take it to another landfill. And those are things that this community is already dealing with, in addition to a community that already has cancer rates 4 times the national average. 2015, we were ranked number 1 as the asthma capital by the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. And we continue to receive an F grade when it comes to ozone pollution. And so these data centers coming in like XAI, again, he calls it Colossus. These big gigantic buildings that are operating, him specifically was operating the facility off of unpermitted air turbines, which leads to emissions, direct and indirect, that are coming from these turbines that increase particulate matter in the air, formaldehyde, in addition to nitrogen dioxide, and these are smog forming pollution. Again, in communities where there are already high asthma rates, people are dealing with COPD, and many of the community members are talking about, like, the smells that are in the air, like rotten cabbage, just not being able to come out due to bad air quality. And I can even relate to that. I remember being in middle school, right? Sometimes we couldn't go out on the playground and play, or just back in the day, we had recess. We couldn't go out because the air quality was so bad. And again, this is a community that's already been overburdened with this type of pollution. And one of the conversations that, I think one of you all brought up about the noise pollution, he's also put another facility at the border, which is Mississippi, but it's like the border between Tennessee and Memphis, right next door to South Memphis. And there's a lot of conversation about noise pollution, people not being able to sleep. Their sleep is being disrupted, this constant humming noise. And so, again, we already have an F, right? We already have high asthma rates, and you just continue to overburden communities. And again, it happens in lower income communities, predominantly Black communities. And while we do have data centers that are happening across the country, this uptick in building is happening predominantly in the South, in Black folks in our backyards. And unfortunately, even when here in Memphis, when he applied for a permit for these illegal turbines, the community came out in droves. submitted comments and said, listen, we don't want this in our backyard, and still our health department, which regulates air pollution in our community, still approved him for an air permit, right? So even when our communities are saying, no, we don't want this, this pollution, we don't want this harmful business in our community, unfortunately, too many of our elected officials are voting against the will of the people. And that's a big part of this. And so we all deserve to breathe clean air, and have access to clean water and environment. And, it just hits in so many ways. Energy burden, parents having to take time off of work. You may be sick, your kid may have an asthma attack. So then communities that are already lower income are continue to be impacted on an economic level on ways that they can't even afford to. And so we are going to have to be very diligent in our work, as many of us already are, to continue to push back. We just can't sit back and allow this to happen or feel apathetic as if we don't have any power, because we do.
Thank you, Yolanda. Yeah, so we've got the huge energy demands, taxing the grid and having to create new infrastructure. We've got energy backup on top of that, which is causing air pollution in communities, and of course the many other noise pollution and the many other challenges that Yolanda mentioned. Now we're going to go to Charles to talk about the water issues surrounding these facilities. And then we're going to let Andrea wrap it all up with all the things that we missed.
Yeah, so I think one of the kind of common questions that people have is, how does a data center use water, given that it's essentially a giant building full of computers? And there's a couple ways. One is the direct water use. Data centers use water to cool their facilities or to help cool their facilities. Using water to cool is actually more efficient than using just like pure AC. And you also have to remember your AC has liquid refrigerants in it. So it's basically the same principle on a larger scale. And, when you look at water consumption for data centers across the country, it's a pretty significant number. So I think the most recent estimates we had were that data centers in the United States consume something like 450 million gallons of water a day. That is the equivalent of 4,500,000 households, because we all use probably about 100 gallons of water a day personally. So it's certainly not, taking up most of our water or most of the water in every single community. But as I talked about, what you see localized impacts, and you see impacts on specific populations from water use. In Virginia, they have this giant concentration of data centers. And when you have that, and when you certainly, like Alabama or Louisiana, don't have the regulatory ability, or, like other states maybe don't have the regulatory will to actually, allocate this water fairly, you can wind up with localized shortages. There was a story, not to steal Andrea's thunder, out of Georgia, where a data center moved next door and they were using water from an aquifer, and it dried up people's backyard wells. And, if you have ever been to the rural South, that there are a lot of people that are not on city water, that are on their own private wells. And that's the only way that they can access drinking water to bathe their kids, to cook with. And so that really is kind of the key is, we see these localized impacts. We often see, like Yolanda mentioned, kind of local or state officials in some cases really bending over backwards for these data center developers, and not considering and not really taking seriously the fact that this could impact their constituents. So, again, our biggest concern in Alabama, and I think this is true across the Southeast, is just like the concentration of these, and the fact that a lot of times elected officials and the data center developers themselves don't take water seriously as a concern. I mean, if I've heard from people who are in this industry that they look at, do I have power? Do I have fiber? Anything else I can pay my way out of, is their attitude. And unfortunately, especially if you're in the rural South, if you're in a low income community, if you're in an environmental justice community, you can't pay your way out of that. you have to move, and that's expensive, and you probably don't want to. I mean, like I said, I was in a city council meeting this morning, and one of the communities that's opposed to this data center that's proposed for Bessemer, Alabama, is what they call a legacy community. It was founded by freed people after the Civil War, and they've been there. Those families have been there since then. They don't want to move. They shouldn't have to move because somebody from Georgia or California or New York, wants to come in and make millions of dollars, billions of dollars off the backs of that community. So, there's a lot of issues around water use, but it really all comes back to local control.
So Charles, there's a couple of water questions in the chat that I'm going to go ahead and cover here because it's relevant to the water story. Do data centers use potable water for cooling? And the answer to that is yes. I don't know if you want to expound on why that is. And then what happens to the water they use? What's the quality of the water that's released, and where does it go?
Yeah, so those are both great questions, and they kind of tie into each other very well. So data centers do generally use potable water for cooling. You're running these through pipes. You don't want contaminants to build up within the pipes. You don't want bacterial or algal growth in those pipes. So they do use potable water. And I've actually, based on everything I've seen in Alabama, I think every single data center that exists right now is using municipal water. So they're getting it from cities or counties. With the water that they use, they add things like algicides, what they call descaling agents that prevent that buildup. And that has to be treated once they're finished with it. And at least in Alabama, the kind of standard industry practice is that goes to a municipal sewage treatment plant, which is also going to increase your sewer rates because you're going to be paying more for the treatment chemicals, more for the energy that it takes to treat the wastewater from these plants. And so you kind of get it coming and going when it comes to water quality. They're using clean water, they're turning it into dirty water, and utility customers are paying on both ends.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea now to talk about more of the community impacts. In particular, if you are able, Andrea, if this is an area that you feel comfortable talking about, the economic side of that. So there's some questions in the Q&A about what is the incentive to local city councils and county commissions to approve a data center, to want a data center in their community? And then there's a question about tax credits for the county or the city. So if you have some information about that sort of economic side and why would these communities leaders not be listening to all of these impacts? What's so attractive about these things?
Well, the first thing is that we are still learning about the impacts of data centers. So a lot of these community leaders are strapped for cash, if I can say that, right? Data centers, at least in Georgia, they are kind of populated in our tier 1 counties or cities that need economic development. Cities need revenue in order to function, in order to move, and they get that from property taxes, sales taxes. And so data centers offer that, or they say they bring that. They also say they bring economic development, which is jobs for people. Now, that is questionable because, of course, when they are doing the build out during construction, yes, you do see movement, you do see jobs, but a data center doesn't need all that in order to function, in order to move, in order to operate. And so they're not sustainable jobs, they're short-term jobs. And also in terms of communities being strapped for cash or wanting revenue, that is how they basically get them. Georgia, at least for us, as I mentioned before, we are a very lax state and we leave it up to local control. But a lot of local control does not have the expertise or knowledge in order to be able to do those types of things, to investigate, to do the community impact assessments, those types of things in order to be able to figure out if they can absorb a data center. So there's a lot of unknowns, I guess you can say. And I think data centers are taking advantage of that. We also have tax credits, exemptions here in Georgia, where they can get exemptions for the equipment. And so we are actually enticing them to come. We also have an issue in terms of Georgia Power. Georgia Power, which is a part of the Southern Company, they operate, how they get their revenue here in Georgia, how they get their profit is what they build out. When they build out the grid, they are able to get money from that, right? And so it would behoove them as a monopoly to be able to say, yes, we would like to be able to build out and expand because that is how we're going to be able to get paid and how we're going to build our profit instead of having performance types based profits where how much people you save for money, how much renewable energy you bring in. It's what you build out and what you create for the grid. So there's a lot of speculative nature building going on now, which they can benefit from that as well. But who pays for it? Who actually ultimately pays for data centers? Well, the utility customer does. And it doesn't matter if you are on Georgia Power or if you're an EMC or you're a MEAG, because all of that power, everything that they need, they're going to pass on to the ratepayer. When we look at Georgia, even before data centers came, when we were paying for Plant Vogtle, we were paying $43 extra a month in terms of our bills. And on top of that, last summer, about 200 to 250,000 people were shut off in terms of cutoff for their bills to Georgia Power. I don't know what that number is for the EMCs or for MEAGs. And so a lot of the things that are missing is in terms of transparency. We don't know where they are. We don't know how many they are. They enter into NDAs, non-disclosure agreements with communities. In Fayetteville County, and one of the things I mentioned before that this goes against the whole divide. They are in every county just about. But then they kind of like are structured or built in places where the county does not see as much development. So that's more so minority areas in those particular counties. But one of the things that we can't get is that we can't get an NDA. They can enter into an NDA with a homeowner, right, to sell their property. And that homeowner does not need to tell their neighbor that we sold our property to this data center. So then as they begin the process of doing the build out in order to be able to accommodate them, then these homeowners are seeing all of this work happening in their community. Them doing the right of way to put the poles there, them tearing down homes and putting data centers in their backyard where you can see all the trees, the canopies that are leaving. So that is a major impact. So not only is it that my bills are increasing, but my community is looking a lot differently. And so those are the things that we are seeing, and those are the things, and a lot of communities are playing catch up, right? They are not knowing right until it happens that data center is coming. Those relationships were already probably being built with either the Community Development Authority or the state has come in. And so a lot of these communities are finding out after the fact. And then they have to kind of play catch up to understand, to be able to fight it, to be able to see how we can do community benefits. So I think a lot of people, a lot of industries take advantage of the unknown, right? And that is basically what we're dealing with here in Georgia, and I think across the Southeast.
Yes, thank you for that. I think you answered a lot of those questions that were in the Q&A already. And then thank you for bringing up the NDAs. Non-disclosure agreements are definitely something that, as a tactic that these companies are using. I know in our state, and I'm sure in all the states. And I think probably each state has different laws and rules around who can sign NDAs and who can't and for what reasons. And in Alabama, the elected officials, city council was able to sign an NDA. So that just seems not right to us. But I did want to ask this one question that's in the Q&A before we move on to the next thing we're going to do is get into some specific case examples that you guys have in each of your states. Because I know we did talk a little bit about some of those as you were talking about your different areas of impacts. But I think it's helpful to like look at a specific example of a data center that's come in, or that in whatever stage. If you want to give an example of one that's in the works that you're fighting, or one that maybe is a success story, if there is one that's been successfully kind of dealt with, or one that's been there for a while and what challenges that's posing, whatever you want to choose. But does anyone know anything about radiation levels from these plants? There's a comment in the Q&A that they're higher, and then they're not good for people and animals and other things that live around it. And I know we've been dealing with one in Birmingham where the Greater Birmingham Humane Society is nearby. And so there's been a lot of concerns raised about the noise and the vibrations and hums that might affect the animals in the Humane Society. I don't know if any of you have anything to add to that comment or question before we move on. Looks like not. Okay, so we'll move on to, that's maybe something that we can research, radiation levels. I'm not clear on those. We'll move on to the case examples, and I'm gonna we can fruit basket turnover. Whoever wants to start, just raise your hand.
I can kick us off.
Andrea, you can start. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Andrea.
Katie. You can go ahead, Katie. That's fine.
Awesome. No, thank you. Well, Cindy, if you remember a year ago, I was screaming to anyone who would listen about the 3 gas plants that were approved for our meta hyperscaler in North Louisiana. I have some terrible news, actually. So since then, Meta has announced that they are actually going to be way bigger. And not only do they just need 3, they need 10 gas-fired power plants for this one customer. So they put forth this request a few weeks ago to request an additional 7 gas-fired power plants. Cindy, we're talking about 7,000 megawatts, right? We're talking about enough carbon, like 26 million tons of carbon emissions coming from these plants, located not only on site in northern Louisiana, but all throughout Cancer Alley, an area already overburdened with all of the carcinogens and all of the things that cause detrimental effects to our health. We are honestly struggling to even wrap our brains around what it means to not only request 10 power plants, but have them approved within 8 months, right? And so our governor had a bright idea to introduce what he's calling a lightning initiative, which, as I said, pretty much guarantees approval for these projects in 8 months. And, a few weeks ago, I believe maybe 2 weeks ago at our Public Service Commission, one of the commissioners was like, well, in the state legislature, we pass bills in 90 days. And I'm like, well, have you seen the result of your 90-day bills, right? Like Louisiana isn't exactly, heralded as a place of great policy, right? And so the fact that they are now trying to rush through approval for, again, I hate to keep using the word unprecedented, but we have never seen something like this before. And we are gearing up to really honestly be in the fight of our lives over the next year, preparing for over 1,200 pages of testimony, much of it redacted. And when I say redacted, I don't just mean, every other line or a typical line being blacked out. I mean literal entire pages of testimony from our utilities, from Meta or whatever subsidiary they choose to hide behind at the time, in these procedural hearings where we never really get the answers we need, right? Because they hide them behind non-disclosure agreements, non-transparent testimony, and whatever other tricks of the trade that they come up with at the moment. So we are really, really in something very different for our state. Typically, the fight or the concern is, what is oil and gas doing, right? How are they displacing people, or how are they harming people? But we are now at a point in Louisiana where even oil and gas is saying, well, who is paying for that bill? Because I'm not. When you've got the refinery saying, don't put that on my bill, then people need to wake up. If we're talking about, changes on our bill, they're saying, well, just imagine that for a large industrial user, right? Imagine what that looks like for a small business in Louisiana. Who are we actually building any of these power plants for? Because we don't get to benefit almost off of a single electron from what you're making, right? Again, we're talking about facilities that need uninterrupted power all the time. And it's just really, really starting to unseat folks. It's starting to get community active. And I don't mean just the people in closest proximity to this facility. I mean, the whole state is mad, right? Because what are we doing and who are we doing it for, right? We are in such a critical point in Louisiana culture and history with land lost and canceling projects meant to restore our coast, and, brain drain from our teachers and our students leaving the state because they don't see a future here. And now we have our Public Service Commission, who is just literally playing as a lapdog to big tech right now. And it is really, really concerning. But that's not all. Since Meta's announcement, we've also gotten interest, not just interest, right? Now Anthropic is coming, right? We're starting to get some Bitcoin mining in West Feliciana, right outside of Baton Rouge, right? And Amazon's coming, right? They're heading up to Shreveport and building 3 campuses, right? And so, as Yolanda mentioned earlier, these border impacts, we are growing increasingly concerned about the cumulative impacts of clustering all these data centers together in all these border states, in states that don't have bodies that appropriate water or even work together to ensure we have an equitable or a working transmission grid, right? And so some really, really concerning things happening here in Louisiana. So if you're a praying folk, or if whatever you do to your folks, do that for us, because baby, we are fighting like hell right now to slow down what is sure to be something that is not good for anyone here, anyone that loves it here either.
Wow. That's wow. Seven power
10,
plants.
10 power plants
10
for
power
one
plants
customer.
for one customer. And so, and you bring up an excellent point that these facilities are not just storing data and processing data from people in Louisiana or even people in the Southeast. This is global, right? We know that these big companies. So, I mean, this may be a bad analogy, but it feels like cotton, like we in the South, we like supplied the world with cotton on the backs of laborers and slaves and all of that in the South. And now like these places where these things are clustering are powering the cloud and powering the technology for the whole entire country. And so it's very extractive and exploitative of the places where this infrastructure exists. And we've got to start getting this message beyond our own backyards and into the places which is why this is good that this is a multi-state webinar, so we can start banding together as states and as a region to tell the rest of the world that we're not gonna do this for them without some help.
And if I can, I just have to say it is especially insulting because this exact same commission just voted to approve the first ever service abandonment in our country's history, right? Since the history of flipping the light switch and light bulbs, we now have a community in South Louisiana who has not had power since 2021. And our commission allowed the utility to go ahead and revoke that service, right? So we have people who do not have power. And as many of us on this call believe, power isn't just a privilege, it is a human right. And folks are down there struggling, suffering right now. And we're on the brink of an upcoming hurricane season.
Okay, I don't know if anybody wants to follow Katie on that, but Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you next.
Well,
we're going to get to just let me tell the audience, we're going to get to solutions and things we can all do to plug in. So this is really hard stuff to talk about, and it's reality, but we are doing stuff, and we're going to get to that more like hopeful side in a minute.
I'll be real quick because I think she knocked it out the park in terms of what's happening in communities. We're seeing the same thing here in Georgia. Georgia has cheap land. As I mentioned, we are a state where the median income is about maybe $42,000 a year. So people are looking for work, and communities and cities are looking for revenue. And so we are seeing data centers or crypto mines, or in every area of the state. We are a water-rich state, and so they believe they can pull from that. Plus, we have very lax environmental controls and regulations, and so we're seeing that in every community, and we are seeing big, large-scale data centers and small-scale data centers. And the issue is that in terms of transparency, we do not know how much they are pulling from our water. We don't know how much they're putting out in terms of the humming and how long they operate. So there's a lot of known unknowns that they take advantage of. But the other thing is that we have data centers that are planned, that are in the works in Rockdale County and Fayette County. There's one that's like maybe 5 miles away from my home. And so there's a lot of things that are happening. It's quickly because they're trying to get it in there quick, because they know that there's some pushback. We are also finding out with the Georgia Power's IRP is that because they are speculating on how much power they have to look for data centers, they're looking for other things in order to be able to fund that. So they're looking at getting our coal plants again. So where coal plants were closing, they're considering coal plants again. Then also they're considering in terms of fossil fuels, and not going along with the things that they had planned in order to close it up and then be able to look at renewable energy. And so those are the things that we're seeing in terms of data centers, because they have basically in every county. We have 159 counties, and in 1,000 cities, there is a data center planned in just about every one of them. And that's Republican, Democrat, that is across the board. One thing I could say that's happened with data centers is that it actually has probably bridged that partisan divide. There are a lot of lawmakers in the state of Georgia from the Republican side that have introduced legislation. Didn't go anywhere, and we can talk about that, but legislation in order to address some of that. So one of the things it's done is that it has brought some of us together in terms of addressing that issue with data centers. And I'll leave it at that.
Yes, I think that's a great point to bring out. We're seeing the same thing in Alabama, that there's opposition for maybe various reasons or varying reasons across the political spectrum on data center issues. Yolanda?
Yeah, so as Katie was talking, of course, I started thinking about the Silicon Valley slogan, move fast, break things. And it's important to talk about these things that they're breaking communities, right? They're affecting the public health and environment of people. And to move so callously with these data centers, to just not think about the public impact. We all owe it to our communities, but just overall humanity, right? To just be decent. And the things that are being done, they're just not decent things, right? Just not being good community partners. And so just thinking about, again, in Memphis, communities already overburdened. And as Andrea was saying, that these are communities that are cash strapped. Many of them are predominantly Black and brown communities. The industries that were thriving there are now leaving. And so now these data centers are coming in, and this is forecasted use. Like, these are not data centers that are being built out at large scale because we're behind and they just need this cloud storage because we've run out. This is forecasted use that we don't even know that if this AI boom is going to burst like the .com boom, right? So they're doing all this infrastructure build out and causing harm and violence to these communities. And we don't even know if these facilities are even going to be needed, right? Because one thing that we know, that, like my mom used to say, history repeats itself. And when I look at places like TikTok and I see the kids doing what they call life hacks and how they're starting to cook food from scratch again, I believe enough in humanity to feel like at some point we're going to wake up and we're going to be like, yeah, this is just too much. I want to go to an analog way of doing things. And so we're doing all this forecasting and building out and harming communities. And there's nothing that says that we are actually going to need all of these data centers. And that's what's scary to me. And the harm that's being done to our environment, to communities, to people, to public health, we're not going to be able to undo this mess. Like, we're not going to be able to undo this harm. And the communities that are most affected, as always, that are often your Black and brown communities, are going to be stuck with the short end of the sticks. Communities who can't afford any more losses due to cumulative impacts, due to low socioeconomic status. They cannot afford the hits that they're being forced to take at the hands of billionaires. Like, they can't afford it. And so, unfortunately, AI has been woven into our lives on so many levels. Health records, police records, like, they've strategically woven it in. But we're really going to have to be intentional about thinking, like, this is not guaranteed. Like, this is not something that they're building because we need it. They're doing this because it's another experiment.
Yes, thank you for that, Yolanda. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm going to try to get to those in a minute. And I agree with, I think Kathy or somebody just posted that if you can put your questions in the Q&A. It's a little easier for the panelists to look at them individually and respond than it is in the sort of running chat. So just keep that in mind. But we will get to some of these comments and questions. I want to give Charles an opportunity. I don't know that we have anything going on in Alabama that could be any different or needs to be mentioned that wasn't already mentioned in some of the horrific cases going on in the other states. But if there's anything you want to mention before we quickly get into solutions, because I think we want to bring this conversation back up to at least some ways that we're all trying to deal with this. So I don't know if you want to talk about Bessemer or Nebius or anything like that.
Yeah, I'll touch on Bessemer because I think it is obviously XAI in Memphis is exemplary of kind of the bad behavior of certain tech companies, but I think everybody could agree that Elon Musk is maybe, let's call him a unique individual, right? But a lot of these same companies or similar developers are cribbing from the same playbook. And Bessemer, to me, has just been a stellar example of why these people just cannot be trusted. So the developers came in, they had multiple elected officials, city officials sign non-disclosure agreements. And I'm going to plant a seed at the end of this to get y'all's wheels turning, hopefully. And they pitched them this great project. They said there was a Fortune 10 company behind it. They've said all of these things that are just turned out not to be true. There's no company behind this. It's entirely speculative. They don't even have, as far as we know, any customers lined up. And so, this is their playbook. They come in, they say, we're going to give you $100 million in tax revenue a year. We're going to do all this stuff for the schools. We're going to do all of this stuff. And it winds up being vapor. Even before the project has broken ground, you found out half of what they told you isn't true. And so that to me is just, I can't trust somebody like that in my community. I don't want to work with them. If you can't tell me, like, I understand that, a lot of these guys, they're salespeople. That's what they really are. They're salesmen. And maybe you spin a little bit when you sell stuff, but you don't come out and blatantly lie to our faces. And so that's kind of what I've seen in this space and in this industry is people who are willing to say or do anything to get what they want. And to that point, I think everybody can kind of agree, whether it's legal or not, an elected official signing an NDA about something they're going to vote on is pretty unethical. I think one of the questions I have from having a law degree is one of the things you have to have a valid contract, and an NDA is a contract, is what they call consideration. And that just means that somebody's given you something in exchange for signing that contract. And you can't have a valid contract without that, but I also don't know how you can give consideration to an elected official in exchange for them signing a non-disclosure agreement in their official capacity. So that's just a question to ask. And hopefully some people who are real lawyers and are barred somewhere can answer that or file some lawsuits.
Okay, thanks, Charles. So there's definitely some progress in these fights going on and different strategies that are being used. And I do want us to get to that part. And one of the questions I've seen a couple of times, and it's in the Q&A right now, is can counties, and I'm going to add also cities, set standards for data centers that would require gray water systems and a certain percentage of their energy produced through solar and wind power. My recollection was 2 years ago, most of these tech companies had set their own standards and said that they were going to use renewable energy on their projects and had commitments for that. And so I think we need to at least name the reality in the room that this administration's energy dominance, fossil fuel dominance approach to our energy in the U.S. is part of this story. And these companies have walked back their commitments to renewable energy. And it seems like it's all gas all the time right now. And I know in Alabama, we don't have 10 new gas plants proposed, thank goodness, but we do have a expansion of a gas pipeline coming all the way across the 10 counties, all the way across the state. And there are multiple gas pipelines being proposed from Mississippi connecting into that one. And then that one's going through Georgia and connecting into South Carolina. So they're building out that pipeline infrastructure. Who knows? Maybe some of that gas is coming from those 10 plants in Louisiana. I wouldn't be surprised. So it's we have heard rumors too, as Andrea mentioned, of restarting coal plants that were slated to be they were either being changed to gas or slated to be shut down. So this is not a good direction. It is a backwards direction for our communities and our environment, and it is concerning. But let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about what approaches we're taking in different areas to try and combat these and address these. And I'm going to start with Charles on this, just because I know that we have some positive news, at least in Birmingham, on and in some other communities, on some local ordinances that are being developed sort of proactively, somewhat. And so I'll let Charles start there, and then we'll hear from some of the other. I know there's a lawsuit in the South Memphis situation, and there's also someone mentioned in the chat about upcoming elections, and I know some election stuff has happened in Georgia and is still happening. So we'll to the extent that we can all talk about that as nonpartisan groups, we'll do that. So Charles, if you want to talk about some of what we're and the small step legislation that we had this year too.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a few positive developments in Alabama. And actually, after I went to the Bessemer City Council meeting this morning, went straight to Birmingham City Hall to read a copy of their new proposed data center ordinance, which I have to say, and I haven't read every single data center ordinance in the Southeast, but and I'm a Birmingham resident, so I'm a little bit biased, but I think this would be one of the strongest data center ordinances in the country. Some of the kind of highlights that I can think of off the top of my head, it prohibits on-site combustion-based electricity generation. So we're not even talking just banning fossil fuel use. We're talking about you can't use like wood pellets or any kind of like fake renewables like that. And so that's really good. From the water perspective, the way they've structured it requires them to use closed loop systems and basically prohibits them really from consuming any potable water, except for the amount that they use to recharge the first or to charge the closed loop part of the closed loop system at the very beginning. So that's really impressive to me. One thing I'll also highlight is functionally, an ordinance that strong, or really any ordinance that has any kind of teeth, is almost as good as a moratorium, because these guys don't want to do anything that they don't want to do. Like, that's their attitude. It's like, you can't tell us what to do. And so if you even tell them, hey, we want you to use closed loop systems, a lot of them, and especially the bad actors, they're just going to go to the next town. They're going to ignore your community. They're going to move on. So, I think Birmingham's ordinance is really great. We've got a public hearing on April 28th for those of y'all that live in Birmingham. They're on the call, and that'll be, regular time, City Council, 9:30 a.m. As Cindy mentioned, we've also had a couple of what I would consider baby steps at the state level. One is a bill that would prohibit utilities from passing along certain costs of new infrastructure associated with data centers to customers, to ratepayers. One thing that I actually thought was really interesting that I hadn't thought about for that bill was I talked with one of its sponsors who actually represents the Bessemer area, Representative Tillman, and he told me, he saw it not only as a way to protect ratepayers as a consumer protection issue, but as a way to encourage brownfield redevelopment and using brownfield sites instead of greenfield sites. Because if you have a brownfield site, you already have the infrastructure. Nobody has to pay for it. So I thought that was an interesting angle. And then we also had a bill that is it's all right. And it brings our tax abatements for data centers in line with our tax abatements for other industrial uses. Back in the 90s, before we had hyperscalers, Alabama had some really generous tax breaks for data centers because we were interested in bringing kind of those smaller scale sub 1 megawatt ones that Katie talked about to Alabama. And, I think that's fine policy. the issue with the bill that passed in Alabama this year is it still allows them to abate taxes on the computing components, which are the most expensive part of the data center. And it still allows them to abate property taxes for 20 years, which is longer than the life of most of these data centers. So it's honestly still a pretty bad situation in terms of the tax abatements in Alabama, and we'd like to see that improved. The big thing that these two bills do, though, is they get definitions of hyperscale data center into our state law. So that gives us a platform that we can build on. You know, we're not in the situation that Georgia or Tennessee or Louisiana is, where these guys have just seen a gold rush in Alabama and they're all coming here right now. So we haven't seen the backlash that we've seen in Georgia and Tennessee and Louisiana yet either. So I think that in the coming years, we'll kind of see these bills as a first step towards taking really serious action on some of the harmful impacts of data centers. But for now, they're just kind of, like I said, they're a little platform. There's something we can build on. And, you know, I'm super excited to hear about what other states have done in this arena, because I know they are much further along than we are.
All right, who wants to go next on that front?
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
I know that the fight against AI and data centers sometimes may feel overwhelming and like a losing battle, even for some folks. But I'm here to let you know we've actually defeated $82 billion worth of these projects around the country. And that is a feat, right? They are scrambling because were not prepared for this opposition. And like I said, folks are fighting like hell, not just because they don't want it in their backyards, but they realize we are diverting our resources and our energy and the things that we don't need, instead of giving and supporting the people and the things that we do need. As I mentioned here, we have people here in Louisiana with no power since 2021, but you can build $21 billion in new generation for this guy who has probably never been to Louisiana and still chose to bastardize our culture and call his investment company Beignet Investor, right? Like, stop insulting us, right? But we're seeing wins all around the state here too. Right here in New Orleans, we got a 1-year moratorium on data center development. And that was just sheer community involvement. They heard that someone was interested and they said, hell no.
Awesome.
Well, one of the
Andrea?
things we're seeing here in Georgia is, well, the first thing I mentioned is the bipartisanship in terms of legislation. There were 15 bills that were introduced to address data centers from Republicans and Democrats this legislative session. Unfortunately, nothing passed, nothing happened. A lot of that has to do in terms of the stronghold that Georgia Power has on our General Assembly as well as data centers. But the other thing that we're seeing is, like, we also see moratoriums and ordinances in different cities and towns, but people are also trying to figure out, okay, what type of community benefits can we get from it if you do come here? And that kind of somehow makes them a little scary, or makes them not consider coming into a particular community. But we've been pushing for that, trying to help in terms of having community benefits packages for people so they can get something out of it. And in terms of, solar panels on data centers, making sure that that there is true economic development for communities. And once you realize that, once the data centers see that the type of work that they would have to do in order to go ahead and appease these communities, they do go some other place, which is unfortunate, because if we had those state structured types of policies and laws, then they couldn't just whack-a-mole and go to different towns and different cities where they would have to fight for that too. And so one of the things that we saw here in Georgia, and this is affordability thing here, was the election, the PSC, the Public Service Commission. We had an election in 2025, which was an off year, and first time in about over 20 years, we were able to remove 2 Republicans. I'm not saying that this is I'm not trying to be partisan. I'm just saying these are the people who approved these types of data centers, and also approved some of the IRPs and what Georgia Power is planning on doing, which has contributed to the affordability crisis here in Georgia in terms of energy costs. We were able to remove 2 of them. And we have 2 new public service commissioners. We also have another election for public service that is coming, public service commission that's coming up in 2026. That it would be two positions. The one position would have to run again, but the commissioner that was in that position, Trisha Pridemore, she decided she was not going to run anymore because more than likely she was going to have to answer for some of the decisions that she's made and the votes that she's had. So we're seeing that coming up. It's slow, it's twofold. It's elections. It's also legislation. We plan on holding a lot of the elected officials that held us up and stopped some of this legislation to go through, because as I mentioned, in Georgia, the General Assembly, we were able to get tax exemptions removed in 2024, and Governor Kemp vetoed that legislation. We were also able to see and to get legislation voted on to in the committee to have data centers pay for their own generation, which will help keep energy bills down. That actually couldn't even make to the floor. Georgia Power got a General Assembly shut down, and the Senate actually did not convene again until over the weekend. So we are seeing some movement, but we are also seeing them scrambling as well. They are paying politicians. They are paying in elections. They can do that. And people see, as I said before, they see the money, they see the opportunity, and they're taking advantage of it. So where we're seeing them running scared, which we know that, that benefits and that helps with community building, we are also seeing them fight back as well. So we are looking forward to this next upcoming election. We are looking forward to utilizing that as a vehicle to show that people are serious across the board, that they want to see change, and they want to make sure that the General Assembly and that their elected officials are hearing us and answering the call that we ask for them to ensure that our bills don't go up, that they are doing the community benefits packages if they're going to bring data centers in, and that they are making sure that any types of cost generation that comes, it will not be on the backs of Georgians.
Thank you for that. Yes, your PSC elections in 2025 caused some shaking in the boots in Alabama, and and some wild stuff got introduced in 2026, and unfortunately passed. Some of it passed.
Yeah,
So,
not to interrupt, but didn't they decide? Wasn't there discussion in Alabama to say that you were not going to do elect PSC commissioners anymore? They're looking at having them appointed.
well, that was a bill that was introduced. That one brought lots of fire
Yeah.
from public engagement and did not pass. So
Good,
they didn't
good.
take away the elections, but the one that ended up passing does call for some appointments that would eventually some new appointments to expand the commission. So the appointments are kind of in the immediate, and then correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, but then eventually would be elected by districts instead of the whole state, which is now we only have 3, and they get elected at the whole state level. So, but there are going to be 4 new appointments this summer based on that bill that did pass.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a fiery
Yeah.
session.
We're following you
and-
all because we're concerned about that too. We're saying,
Yeah.
that might be what the General Assembly does next. So,
Yeah, and I agree with you that we're seeing the same. Even though we're not necessarily getting the bills passed that we want to see passed, and some are passing that we don't want to see, that public engagement, that public outcry is real. And we have in Alabama, it's a big election year. All the state offices get elected. So I know the league is great at getting out there and questioning candidates and holding candidate forums. And I feel certain that this issue will be on in the conversation, and I hope folks are listening. So Yolanda, do you want to talk about I don't know if you can even talk about the lawsuit, because I know that's like in the happening right now, but
No, I won't talk about the lawsuit. Well, I can mention the lawsuit where NAACP is suing XAI for running illegal natural gas turbines in South Haven without a permit. And of course, you can Google and look online. We've also posted some things on the website about it. But someone mentioned in the comments about the gray water facility that XAI said that they will build here in Memphis. So in Memphis, we get our water 100% from our Memphis sand aquifer. And so they were building a gray water facility so that they would not have to rely on our clean drinking water to cool these data centers. And so they have basically stopped construction on the gray water facility. So that I think it was like something along so that they could focus on the other data centers, but this was a promise that they made after pushback from advocates in the city saying, like, no, you just can't use our energy and water like this, right? And so now they've kind of reneged on it. And one of the things about Tennessee is, unfortunately, especially when we push back against things here in Memphis, like we were able to stop a pipeline, and then so legislators in the capital in Nashville, they went and they blocked it where not our county, none of the 95 counties can basically probably stop a pipeline now, right? So when we do something, they go to Nashville and they undo it, so that we can do it. And like they made it harder for us to do community benefits agreements. So if they get any kind of state economic development money, we can't create community benefits agreements in Tennessee, requiring that those companies basically treat communities well. And so they make it harder for us. And because of that, I wanted to mention in Columbiana, Alabama, where last year, I think it was that the mayor voted for a data center and signed an NDA and allowed this data center to come in. And the community swiftly voted him out of office when his term came up. And when I think about the Constitution, we the people, it means all of us, and we have electoral power. And this is not about a party. This is about voting for elected officials that have our best interests in mind, and us showing up at the polls and holding our elected officials accountable, because they're signing these non-disclosure agreements. Some of them are informed about data centers, right? They just don't care. They're looking at tax base and revenue. Some of them are not well informed about data centers, and they're believing what developers and these companies are telling them. But they have a responsibility to us as taxpayers and as people who vote them in office. And I say, don't wait. Organize. If you have not had a data center come in your community yet, this is the time for you to be going to your elected officials and saying, look, this is happening all around the country, and instead of us being reactive, we need to be proactive. What do we need to put in place now to make sure that a developer does not come into our community to take advantage of us? And so that's the best non-legal advice that I give people. Like, use your voting power, use your voice power, and don't wait. Start organizing now and put these things in place, because I like to say it's not about if injustice is going to come to your door. It's about when it's going to come to your door. And the more you can do to form allyship with other people who are dealing with it, in addition to preparing yourself to ensure that when it shows up, you have things in place to push back against it. So reach out to your elected officials, and even the lady I think her name is Deborah, who brought up about the gray water facility. Reach out to our county and our city mayor. Reach out to city council. Make your voice heard. They had a city council meeting tonight. Send them emails and let them know that you're not happy about XAI pulling out of this gray water facility deal, and they need to be held to task to do what they said that they were going to do, because our water is on the line. We don't know how much water is left in the aquifer, right? So, aquifers are draining all over the world, and so we don't have an endless supply of water. And it's important that we hold people accountable, these organizations and developers accountable, when they say that they're going to do something, if we can't stop it.
Amen. Charles, do you want to share what Columbiana has recently done with their newly elected mayor?
Yeah, so I'm really glad Yolanda mentioned that, because it's almost even better that not only did he get, to put it in the language of the South, whooped, he lost by 60 percentage points. He doesn't live in Columbiana anymore. He ran out of town, which is kind of amazing, and brings to mind the days when folks used to get run out of town on a rail. But anyway. So they got a new mayor, and their new mayor, didn't sign an NDA, and had some conversations with her, and I told her, you can still do an ordinance, and it can still be enforced against this company that's expanding. And so they actually drafted and adopted the first comprehensive data center ordinance in Alabama, and it's just some small town, about 5,000 people down in Shelby County. So it definitely shows that at the local level, you can really have an impact, because that's a total 180 in policy in that town in the course of 2 months.
And that's a town that also is, their water system is spring fed, and we've already seen that it has major limitations. They don't even have a water treatment plant because it's so clean from the springs that the water comes from, and it's in certain cases has been found to be drawing down like local creeks because they're connected. So they, you know, to keep expanding the water use of something as large as a data center is a real challenge for a community that's water supply is limited in that way. So we're glad that they did that. Okay, we are at 7:20, and that's when I'm supposed to turn it back over to the league. I think we got to pretty much all the questions. There were a lot of comments in the chat that we didn't get to mention. A lot of resources that were linked from our speakers and other people that I hope folks will be able to copy and paste. Or I also said in one answer to one question, and I hope I'm accurate in saying this, that we can put together, each of us can send some links to the league, and you guys can send them out to the people on the call or to your various state league members. That are places where they can learn more about data centers and learn more about these issues and connect with our speakers and all of that. So I hope that's not inaccurate to say that y'all are willing to do that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to, wait, there's one more question. Is there one more question? There is a question there's a comment in the Q&A that's not really a question. But it's that talking about EMF radiation again. So maybe someone's got some resources we can share on that as well. It's not something I'm that familiar with, and I think we can maybe find some resources to share about radiation regarding these facilities. But thank you guys so much. This was very informative. You guys are all amazing advocates, and we're grateful that you were here as panelists. And I'll turn it back over to, I guess, Kim.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists and to Cindy, of course, for leading this fantastic conversation. It was very informative and frightening all at the same time. So we have a lot of work to do. And as the panelists mentioned, elections are coming up. In Alabama, I just want to mention that our primary is May the 19th. So if you want your voice heard, be sure you get out there and vote. Voter registration deadline is May the 4th. And I also want to mention that prior to the primary, the league is hosting 2 candidate forums. And one is on the PSC race. So that will be on, the PSC one is May the 5th at 6 p.m. and it will be in person in Montgomery at the Museum of Fine Arts, but we will also live stream it. So you can go to our website to find out more information about that soon. We are also going to have a forum for the U.S. Senate candidates, and that will be on May the 7th. The Democratic candidates will be at 6 p.m. and the Republican candidates will be at 7 p.m. And that will also be at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts and live streamed as well. So we are really looking forward to that. There will also be a link on our website in a few days where you can submit questions if you have things that you would like us to ask those candidates. So we hope that you will send us what you want to know and also watch those forums. And now I will turn it over to Debbie. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks. And Kim, I agree with you. In Tennessee, we have so many issues with data centers. And now, having heard from all these wonderful experts, I realized that I only understood a fraction of how many issues we had. So thank you for making the problem bigger and hopefully also providing us with some answers for how to address it. I will say in Tennessee, our primary is May 6th. And I hope that you all really have a sense of how important local and state primaries are, because so many of the problems, but also the solutions, really do seem to have to begin on the local and possibly even on the state level. So thank you again for all of this. And I believe now I turn it over to, I'm sorry, I don't remember who is next.
I'll go.
There,
Yes.
thank you, Chris.
In Louisiana, our relevant dates are April 25th. That is the last day to register online or to update your registration and make sure you're not one of the 500,000 Louisiana voters on the inactive voter list. Our primary is May 16th with a runoff on June 27th. We have a closed party this year for party primary for Public Service Commission, and we have 2 seats up for election in Districts 1, which is where our Caddo-Bossier League is. District 5 is where Caddo-Bossier is. District 1 is where portions of Orleans, St. Tammany, and Tangipahoa parishes are. So we've got 4 local leagues in Louisiana who are actively monitoring this PSC race. And I'll just mention that the League of Women Voters in Ohio has been circulating this great meme about the importance of primary elections. They say primary voters get to vote off the main menu, and those who wait until the general election take home the leftovers. So get out there, make these primaries count. If you're no party, think about voting Republican or Democrat to have a voice.
Thank you. I guess I'm closing it out. So I want to say thank you again for joining us tonight. Huge thank you to our panelists and our moderator for a great conversation over data centers. And thank you everyone who's joined us for our Good Trouble Tuesday. Your presence matters. These conversations exist so people have the facts, the context, and the next steps, because democracy doesn't protect itself. Please keep an eye out for our next Good Trouble Tuesday event, which is going to be coming in our next quarter, and we'll share the details through our newsletters and social media and etc. Now for Georgia, here in Georgia, we never sleep in Georgia when it comes to election and voting. So we just ended our election cycle, and however, I have 3 call to actions for everyone who resides in the state of Georgia. First, we're asking our Governor Kemp, to veto House Bill 369. It is being sold as an election reform bill, but it changes the rules for only 5 counties in the state of Georgia. That is Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett, Cobb, and Clayton. These are our most largest counties and our most diverse counties throughout the whole entire state. This bill will shift major county offices into different election structure and timelines. When we create different election rules depending on where people live, we don't strengthen democracy. We create confusion, deepen distrust, and set dangerous precedents. This policy is truly good for Georgia, as everyone who wrote on it and signed onto this bill. It should be debated openly and applied fairly to all 159 counties in the state of Georgia, not the selective 5 that is on this bill. So we're asking folks who are in the state of Georgia, if you know people in the state of Georgia, to call and email our Governor Kemp and tell him to veto HB 369, not just leave it on his desk, because if he leaves it on his desk, it becomes bill without his signature. So we need him to actively veto this bill. Second is, most voters don't realize that we are on a time clock here in Georgia. In Georgia, many of our ballots have a QR code that is used to scan and tabulate our votes. No matter where you stand on this technology, voters deserve confidence, and counties need a legal, workable plan. Georgia faces, as of July 1st, 2026, a deadline. If the state isn't ready, the fallback will be people mentioned, people will have issues because we will be led to having hand-marked and hand-counted ballots. And at a scale of having over 7 million people who are registered voters in the state of Georgia, it is unrealistic. The county I live in alone, if 10% people show up, that would be 80,000 votes cast. And without this deadline being pushed, we will be facing hand counts. Because in 2024, the QR codes were considered illegal. So our simple ask is to find a clear plan and a timeline that is workable, and approve an extension with benchmarks so voters and election workers aren't left in limos. Once again, we need to call the governor. We need an executive order to push the deadline of July 1st. They have denied the funding to actually improve our election machines. And last but not least, as everyone was talking about, May 19th is our primaries. We have so many things on our ballot. This ballot includes our state Supreme Court seats and other judicial races, because all nonpartisan seats are on our May ballot and not in November. So don't miss our May ballots, because that's who's going to be sitting on our courts. If you don't vote in May, you don't have a voice on our judicial system. We are also voting on 2 public service commissioner seats for this primary, and all of our constitutional seats in the state of Georgia. That is our governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, state school superintendent, commissioner of agriculture, insurance, and labor. These are the folks who shape the state of Georgia. And there are multiple people running. So that means that we need your voices to come out on May 19th. Governor alone on both sides of the aisle has a combo of 16 people running for governor. So if you want your voice heard and you want your governor to be on that ballot come November, you need to come out and vote May 19th. So once again, thank you so much. We are here. I so appreciate all of my sister leagues for joining us on this important conversation about data centers, and happy Earth Day, everyone. And remember, keep showing up for democracy and keep making good trouble.